Let's face it, 95% of hunters hunt to put food on the table. 95%, but that's not what you see. Got to see a lot of cool stuff, meet a lot of cool people. I mean, my first bow hunt, I hung out with Fred Bear, the godfather of modern day archery hunting. If you're supplying and sending money and writing and signing off a petition to stop the importation of African animal parts, trophies from hunters, you represent the Antichrist of wildlife conservation. We started an organization last year. It's called the Shepherds of Wildlife Society. And we want to utilize this incredible material we have, and we want to put those stories in front, the story of wildlife conservation. Hey folks, this is Tom Opre from the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, and I'm here on the Wild Initiative.
Put down your latte and pull on your boots.
I would rest at peace for eternity if my legacy was that I made a positive influence on the non-hunting public about what hunters are and what hunting is.
I finally got my buck on our last real day of hunting.
So a pro-hunting organization is voting against hunting. And that says anti-hunting to me.
There was a year straight where I was averaging up to 200 death threats a day.
I hugged it like I just wanted to hug a bear.
It's proven that the average steak in a grocery store touches 50 to 100 hands and machines. And we're putting that into our body.
Hey y'all, Cable Smith, host of the Lone Star Outdoors Show here.
This is Adam Weatherby.
I'm Corey Jacobson with Elk 101.
This is Christy Titus.
Hey folks, this is John Bear.
You're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 117, but also the very first episode of the Wild Initiative. I'm very excited for y'all to continue on this journey with me, and I'm also very excited to see where this initiative for the wild is going to take all of us. Now, before I get into today's episode, as always, I want to give a huge shout out to Sawyer Products and thank them for their continued support of the podcast. Y'all, if you are looking for the best water filtration, first aid, sunscreen, or insect repellents, make sure y'all head on over to Sawyer.com, check out their entire lineup of products. Y'all, this stuff is fantastic. It's absolutely bulletproof, and it is designed to keep you in the outdoors for longer. Also, as many of y'all that have been following along with my story already know, I have officially quit my day job. I am freelancing and running this podcast full time. And while this podcast will always remain free to anyone that wants to listen and wants to gain this information on getting into the outdoors, there are still costs associated with running it, and it is, without a full-time job, a lot more difficult for me to cover those costs. So if y'all are fans of Living Country in the City and now the Wild Initiative, if you really enjoy this content and want to hear more of it and keep it free for everyone, I would really appreciate it if you went on over to my support page on the website at thewildinitiative.com/support. Y'all, there are a ton of options on there for how you can really contribute to the growth of the Wild Initiative. There's a lot of simple stuff like making sure you're subscribed to the podcast, my YouTube channel, as well as heading on over to iTunes or Stitcher and leaving a positive rating and review. There's also a ton of other options such as shopping with some of my affiliates, buying merch from my store, or even heading on over to my Patreon page and committing to a small monthly contribution. Y'all, there are thousands of you that listen to this podcast each month, and even if just a third or half of you went on over to my Patreon page and committed to contributing just $1 a month, it comes with some amazing rewards, including stuff like ad-free episodes, which I'm pretty sure you're wishing you had right now. And you could be integral in really helping me make some incredible improvements to the podcast. Y'all, just $1 a month helps more than you realize. You probably end up losing more than that just from the change that falls out of your pocket in the dryer. Even if you're not sure if you can contribute, if nothing else, just head on over to patreon.com/thewildinitiative, check out all the options and see what's available. Or head on over to thewildinitiative.com/support, check out all the amazing people on the supporters wall who have really taken the next step and become part of the Wild Initiative family. All right, y'all, getting on to today's episode. I am absolutely ecstatic to introduce y'all to today's guest. Y'all, there are very few people on this earth who I could imagine being a better inaugural guest for the Wild Initiative. Y'all know how passionate I am about the topics of conservation. That's why, y'all, I am so excited to have on the podcast Mr. Tom Opre. I actually recorded this episode several months ago while I was at the POMA Conference in Wichita, Kansas. I was doing a little bit of networking, talking with a few folks, and honestly, after about 5 minutes of talking with Tom, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I had to have him on the podcast. Y'all, there are very few people on this earth who I can imagine are as educated and well-spoken on the topics of the North American model of wildlife conservation and the concept of wildlife conservation in general. Tom really goes in depth on the history of wildlife conservation, his passion for it, and why it is essential for the survival and health of our wildlife and wild places. This is an episode you will want to listen to multiple times through. This is a great episode for anyone that wants to learn more about wildlife conservation, for anyone that really you would like to introduce to the concept of hunting's involvement in conservation and why it is such an integral part. So without any further ado, I hope you all enjoy episode 117 of The Wild Initiative with Tom Opre.
All right, well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time. We're here at the Professional Outdoor Media Association Conference, POMA. I was invited out by several different people who were like, Sam, you need to come to this. You need to meet these folks. And I came out here not really knowing what to expect. And I've had some incredible conversations, just whether it's about business, whether it's about hunting, whether it's about, anything and everything, and meeting some great people. So I'm really, really grateful that everyone got me to come out. I'm really looking forward to being part of this organization. But Tom, you're one of the people I got to meet last night. And
I'm a past president of POMA.
Yep.
So I was the president about 4 years ago. I was a board member for 7 years, and been a member of the organization almost since its inception. But my background, I'm a second generation outdoor communicator. My father wrote for Outdoor Life and Field and Stream for 30 years. I grew up in the Midwest in Detroit, and my father wrote for a newspaper, so I led a pretty blessed childhood in that, not like most of your listeners, I grew up in the outdoors, hunting and fishing, and very, very lucky, very blessed. And through those opportunities, we got involved in a lot of cool things, got to see a lot of cool stuff, meet a lot of cool people. I mean, my first bow hunt, the eve of it, I hung out with Fred Bear, the godfather of modern day archery hunting in the world. And so, you don't really realize a lot of that stuff when you're younger, but, now I'm getting a little more advanced in age, and most people don't know how old I am, and I don't tell them, but, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And, as far as communications go, I like a lot of people, had a passion to do something. Watched my dad doing outdoor writing, and they didn't make much money, so I decided I was going to get in the film business and kind of work my way up the ladder in the real film business. Working in Hollywood features to Shark Week for Discovery Channel to a lot of high-end TV commercials. From all outdoor recreational stuff. I mean, I had about a 13-year run with Sea-Doo Watercraft doing all their advertising. Working with some phenomenal people, in the hunting, fishing, marine, boating, recreation world, and fishing. And it was always fun to work on that. But 10, 12 years ago, I kind of came back into the outdoor world, and I got talked into doing a TV show for NBC Sports called Eye of the Hunter. We had a 7-year run, and literally we're on Monday nights, prime time, 9 p.m. Eastern, against Monday Night Football.
Oh, wow.
So we had the largest audience in all of outdoor television, so based on real ratings. So it was a pretty cool deal. And then back in 2015, a lion got shot named Cecil. A lot of people have heard of this lion. Nobody in Zimbabwe had ever heard of the lion except for the photographic safari people that were taking people out to take pictures, but fortunately,
maybe one or two people in LA have heard of it.
You're on social media. I'm sure somebody's heard of it. But the reality was with that lion being shot and the uproar that came about it, no pun intended, we ended up NBC got cold feet and pulled the plug from our programming. So we looked real hard at what we were doing, and we've been in the film business for a long, long time, and we're like, we see a need, we see a reason to continue doing what what we're doing, but we kind of need to change that message. So about 3 years ago, we started looking at different avenues to get content out. We looked at what the problems were. We looked at what's going on within the whole world of wildlife and habitat conservation. There's some great things going on. I mean, the North American wildlife conservation model, where we as the people own the wildlife, and we have these incredible public lands, and even if the wildlife lives on your private piece of property, you don't own it. We all do. So we all put in and pay for that management. And when I say all of us, it's the hunters. It's the people that buy guns and ammunition through Pittman, Robertson excise taxes. And literally we raise billions of dollars to pay for the hardcore science, the biologists, and pay for the scientists to work on these things, and to pay for the game wardens to make sure we protect those precious resources. And a lot of people don't understand that, especially people that, we saw over the last several years that because of the Cecil Alliance situation, that there was a lot of people that were really out of touch with, unfortunately, the natural world. And let's face it, that's where we come from. We're part of this earth. We are part of these ecosystems that occur, and we have a huge impact. I don't care where you are in the world. I mean, you could be in the highest point, Mount Everest, and what's up there? You go up there and there's trash and oxygen bottles laying around that are empty. Hell, there's bodies. Dead bodies up there, human beings that died up there. And they can't get them off because they can't fly a helicopter up there. Yeah. You go to the lowest part of the earth, the Mariana Trench in the South Pacific. And I've, ever since that tsunami hit Japan, I've always thought there's got to be Fukushima nuclear reactor material everywhere. And you know what? National Geographic went down and did a study a couple of years ago, and they sampled all these did a biological study on the creatures there. And they found that the creatures in the bottom of the trench have been exposed to worse pollutants than the most polluted rivers in China today. And we all know China's got a lot of real problems, when it comes to the environment. Yeah. So that's the legacy that we humans are leaving to this planet. It's what we're leaving to our kids. And so we spent the last several years looking at these problems and saying, okay, how can we pull together the hunting community? Well, unfortunately, a lot of the people in the hunting community, and I'll digress for 1 second. I've watched hunting, because of my relationship and my father being in the business and stuff. And, I watched hunting, when we hunted, it was because we wanted to put food on my table. My dad was a journalist. He didn't make money. He got to go hunting and fishing. Then he had to write about it, which was 90% of what he did all the time was write and research. But the reality there is that, I kind of liken to why we've typically hunted up until about 3 or 4 decades ago. The emphasis was what I call a biocentric approach to hunting. It was about tradition, the family tradition, the tradition amongst ourselves as hunters. It was about putting food on the table. It was about being an active participant with wildlife. Because, if you go back to the late, the 1880s, when Teddy Roosevelt was riding around trying to find a bison to shoot, and there wasn't any bison left because this huge tsunami of European settlement had just gone across the West, the Midwest and West. And, the first thing, what do you do what do humans do when they come into a new area that no humans are really, not a lot of them are there. They're going to conquer it, the colonial times. And, literally the first thing you do with wildlife is you use it to survive, subsist. The next thing you do is you kill it because you want to make some money. So market hunting, look at the bison, look at the passenger pigeon, look at ducks and geese where they used to shoot them with punt guns because there were so many of them. They put these little mini cannons on the front of their canoes and just shoot as many ducks and geese as could and take them down to the market. And we still see market hunting, what they call bushmeat, going on in places like Africa today, where there's a huge multi-billion-dollar trade, illegal trade in wildlife meat. But getting back to the United States and our history, after you've consumed those animals for subsistence and for market hunting to make money, well, the next thing you do is you cut down the forest because you want progress. You got to build cities. You got to put railroads in. So, here in North America, we cut down the forest, and then there's no habitat. So from there, it's like, okay, well, then we want to have our domesticated livestock out there. So the sheep, the goats, the cows, all these different animals that we want to grow out there, but we don't want them competing for the same forage. So we got to get rid of the wildlife, right? Yep. So we put fences up everywhere. And so at the end of the day, what Teddy Roosevelt saw was wildlife decimated, utterly decimated.
Well, and don't forget about our fields of crops as well, which you have to clear out even more space for wheat and our soy and this and that and the other.
Yeah, exactly. And so now we're in a situation, a lot of people talk about wildlife issues, and we hear about that this animal species is going to be in danger. There's no more lions. There's no more elephants. Poaching, whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute, guys, you don't understand this. In certain areas, certain countries, and certain ecosystems, we have way too many animals to the point where they are causing huge problems for the other animals within that ecosystem, huge problems for the vegetation that lives in there, and causing huge problems with human-animal conflict. I like to tell people, well-regulated, scientifically based hunting, never has there been an animal that's been on the quota or the license list that's ever gone extinct. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, it's the opposite. If you were to see the IUCN, which is the kind of the UN entity, it's not the UN, but it's identified by the rest of the world as being the authority on wildlife issues when it comes to populations and habitat. And there's only two places. They came out in 2016 with a survey or a report, and there's only two places in the world where wildlife is either holding their own or increasing in size as far as population and health goes. And that's North America, because of the North American Wildlife Conservation Model. Again, where wildlife has a value, where we take care of it, where it's important to us. We cultivate it, it survives, it prospers, because we have habitat for it and we make that important. But then you have areas in South Africa, Southern Africa, where wildlife has done really well because of the ranching for wildlife. The semi-arid areas down there, they were growing, cows and whatever else they could do livestock-wise. But those animals haven't evolved in those ecosystems to be able to survive very well. And, back in the 1990s, they realized, hey, maybe we could have kudu out here again, or maybe we could have bushbuck, or maybe we could have Cape buffalo. And they found out that these animals survive extremely well, and they're worth a lot of money if you can hunt them. And there's also a market to sell the meat, mm-hmm. perfectly legal. So, so there's a lot of great stories out there. But unfortunately, going back to Cecil the lion, we have the vast majority of the people in our Western educated, and I say that in quotes, educated civilization, don't have a clue what's going on beyond the outside of their doors or outside of their steel and glass jungles. And it's not that and it has a huge adverse effect on wildlife and habitat conservation, because these people are willing to give money to organizations and groups that want to ban hunting or want to stop people from managing animals through sustainable utilization, all based on emotion. But there's no science. And when there's no value to wildlife, guess what happens? Because the greatest threat to wildlife today is not well-regulated hunting. It's not even the poaching we hear about with rhino horn and elephant ivory in Africa. Yeah, that's not a good thing, but it's not going to cause the elephant to go extinct. Maybe in geographic or small areas it might. But at the end of the day, the greatest threat to wildlife today is us. It's the 7.5 billion people on this planet that is predicted to double in the next 50 years. So what happens? You talked about crops. Well, when you have all these people on a planet, well, first of all, humanity wants stability in life, right? So what do we want? Well, we want a roof over our head. We want to have clean water. We want to have food, right? If we don't have food, what happens? We riot. Yeah. So there's a breakdown in society. And where do we riot? In the cities, because that's where all the people are. And those people don't have the resources. Yeah, they might have a garden up on top of their building. They may have something, growing some herbs or something out on their balcony. They may have some tomato plants out there on the balcony. That's great. That's wonderful. But when they make decisions every day to buy certain products or to sign a petition to ban trophy hunting, which, by the way, there's no such thing as trophy hunting. Hunting is hunting. An animal dies. Okay? Yeah. And billions of animals die on this planet every year in order for all of us to survive. Because if animals didn't die, humans wouldn't exist today. And that's just the reality. So what we need to do, what do we need to do? We need to work together. We need to understand that if we want to leave this place better than we found it, that we need to put a priority on the habitat. We have to make sure, because, if we don't have habitat, if all these people are coming into the fold and there's more birth rates are increasing, especially in third world countries. Case in point, go to Africa. And Africa is a big place. It's a continent, everybody. It's not a country. And you can take the country of Africa. The continent of Africa. You can take the continent of Africa and you can literally stick North America, South America, Europe, and India and still have room for a few other countries to fit inside its confines. It's a big place. But you go to something like Ethiopia. Ethiopia is about the same landmass, similar landmass as Texas. And Texas has, 25, 30 million people in it. Pretty well-populated state. Yeah. How many people live in Ethiopia?
No clue.
About 110 million people.
Jeez.
So I have friends that are hunting operators and outfitters and guides there that have been hunting there for a couple generations, and areas that they hunted in even 5 or 10 years ago that they lost, the government wouldn't allow them to continue. These are public lands because there was such a stress on creating food, and the government doesn't want to have chaos with its population. They turn these lands over to the public, and they cut every single tree down, and there's no habitat anymore for the mountain inyala, some of the kudu species that are there. These animals that have been there since the beginning of time. And it's really sad because, if we don't prioritize those places, they're gone. And then there won't be a debate between hunters and anti-hunters because there's not going to be any animals to talk about. So really, we have to understand, when we make these decisions to send, money to the Humane Society of the United States or the Center for Biological Diversity, these people only have one thing and one thing in common, and that is to raise as much money, to have as much power, to line their pockets, to have as much power as they can. By lining those pockets, they hire armies of attorneys. You're paying for, Armani suits and $500 haircuts, and these people are lobbying your governments, or they're trying to get politicians to politicize wildlife conservation. Now, we've had some instances in the last 2-3 years where we just had one last year in New Jersey where the governor candidate decided that, hey, if you vote for me, I'll ban black bear hunting. Now, New Jersey's covered up, or it was Maryland, New Jersey, one of those two states, but it's covered up with black bear. And if you don't manage them, which means take some of them out, they're going to get killed.
Yeah.
I'm doing a project on grizzly bears right now. You can go to the Wildlife Conservation Project on Facebook or wildlifeconservationproject.com or on Amazon Video Direct. If you're a Prime member, you can watch these projects we put out. But we tell the story of what's going on. We bring in the subject matter experts, the scientists, the biologists, even world-class wildlife photographers, some of the guys you've met here at POMA this week, even bring in world-class wildlife artists, because these people are believable and they really tell the story about what's going on. And, we've done focus group research and we look at this stuff and, the vast majority of our Western civilization doesn't want to hear from old white guys trying to tell them, this is what's right and what's wrong. They don't want to hear to the Teddy Roosevelt type of people of the world. But they want to hear from, the biologists, the scientists, the game wardens. They believe them, the artist, because they have a perception that they don't have any skin in the game. And the reality is that these people are very influential. Women, women who like to hunt, women who are really concerned about wildlife and habitat conservation, they're great spokespeople.
I think well-spoken women in this industry are the best advocates we have. It's, guys, we can get chesty with each other, and like you said, it's the whole concept of nobody wants to hear from the privileged white guy anymore. And so when you do have those alternative voices, the women, children, like younger people in this industry, when you have like a well-spoken young lady in her 16, 17 coming in, she's grown up in it and understands it, and takes their walls aren't up when they come up to them and start talking about
stereotypes aren't there. Yeah, the stereotypes. You don't already have this preconceived notion. You have to do a podcast with my wife Olivia. Olivia is she is a phenomenal spokesperson for wildlife and habitat conservation. She was Mrs. Nebraska. She used to work at Cabela. She was marrying Dick Cabela, the owners of the company, their personal assistant for about 5 years. And she ran for Mrs. Nebraska and won. And she had a platform. When the Mrs. things, you have to have this platform, some cause. And hers was, the hunter is the ultimate wildlife conservationist. And of course, she didn't win, but she made it. She made it to the finals and won. Obviously in Nebraska, but didn't win the Mrs. America contest. But she's spent since 2003, her whole life has been about educating people about the importance of these places, these wild places, and the animals that live in them, and the fact that we have to have and take care of these animals, because if we don't, they ain't going to exist.
Yeah.
And, everybody loves to see birds in the bird feeder. Everybody likes to have a deer in the backyard. Everybody likes to see a turkey, or, everybody likes to go driving down the road and see some bison somewhere, or some elk, or, whatever it is.
Well, I mean, you go anywhere that's remotely close to a city where you're going to have tourism, things like that, not even counting like national parks, but, there's some elk, I heard of elk on the side of the road, or bison, or whatever it is, even if it's a couple of deer. How many cars do you see pulled over on the side of the highway or the side of this main street with, kids hanging out the window or cameras coming out? You're right. Everybody loves to see that.
Well, Sam, it's a basic instinct that's in all of our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
We are all hunters. Now, we don't all hunt. But let's face it, there's a reason why campfires mesmerize every single one of us. It doesn't matter if you live in Madrid or London or LA or Toronto. We all love to sit around a fire. And the reason has nothing to do with s'mores or roasted marshmallows. It has to do with the fact that I think we can all agree. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your background is, what your nationality is. But we all can agree on one thing. As long as humans have walked on 2 feet on this planet, we've hunted. And every day, animals are hunting animals, because that is how this planet revolves. That's how it exists. That's how it evolves. And, we have to evolve with it. And we have a huge, huge negative impact on it. And so we have to take the time. We have to educate the people in the cities and say, listen, maybe you don't go hunting, but support people who do hunting. And hunting has some issues too, and I want to talk about that. Hunting's got some, I've watched it for 4 decades. And we, like I said earlier, we were talking about, why do we hunt? And typically what I like to say, it's that biocentric approach to hunting. The reality there is that hunting provided food for us, tools, shelter, clothing, all that. Of course, we don't need that now. We can go down to the store, we can buy something gift wrapped from the butcher, something that some other farmers corn-fed and made taste really dang good.
Yeah. It's got the nice little diaper in the bottom to make you forget that it was ever something alive.
We don't have to get our hands dirty anymore because other people do it. And what I like to talk to, especially when I see the 30-year-old housewife with a couple of kids on her ankles, and she's like, oh, hunters are terrible. You shouldn't do this. And I'm like, ma'am, okay, I get it. I understand that. You're disconnected from our natural, world. But let me just say something to you, or ask you a couple questions. Do you ever go to McDonald's and buy Happy Meals for your kids? Oh, yeah. You kids like Happy Meals. Oh, they love them. Okay. There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. Do you understand that? There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. I don't care if you got the chicken nuggets or the cheeseburger. You, lady, paid somebody to slaughter an animal to feed your kid. And without that animal, there is no Happy Meal. Because that's what the kid wants. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wants to play with a toy, but she wants to fill her belly first. And that's perfectly fine. That is why we exist on this planet. And so taking, animals and hunting animals, managing animals, taking responsibility for them and their habitat is paramount, because we're part of that ecosystem. We have a situation going on in the West right now. I live in Montana, and for 20 some years now, and I spend a lot of time in the mountains hunting elk and deer, and I've watched the grizzly bear populations just continue to grow. And of course, they're, since 1974, they've been on endangered species list. And, typically animals go on the endangered species list because of 2 things happen: overuse, or the other mitigating factors, whether it be disease or drought or something like that destroys their habitat and causes them to die, or they're over-harvested by people for market hunting reasons. Because, like I said earlier, it's never happened, but since, since the turn of the century, when it comes to modern hunting and management of North American wildlife conservation model. But, we look at this stuff and I'm like, hey, folks, we've got grizzly bears everywhere. And the thing is, when Lewis and Clark were coming across the Louisiana Purchase, coming across the Missouri River into my state of Montana, there were tens of millions of bison out there. There were tens of millions of elk. There were millions of mule deer. There was 3 to 4 million bighorn sheep, and they weren't in the mountains. They were out on the plains, out there where all the grasses were, where all the food was, along the rivers. And guess where the grizzly bears were? right there in the middle because that's their predator and that's where they're eating them. You can read the stories in their journals about all the problems they have with grizzly bears constantly, almost every day. They ran into grizzly bears and had problems. Of course, there was no grizzly bears in the eastern part of the United States at that point in time because man had run them out, because that's part of that whole process I said earlier of European settlement and progress. And I say that lightly, progress.
Yeah.
But the reality there is that we've got grizzly bears in every single drainage now where I live. We have grizzly bears now moving out into the plains. They're historic stuff, and that's great. But we have to manage these animals, because if we don't manage them, there's going to be human animal conflict, and we're seeing it. I mean, we just had a bunch of bears killed by the railroads. I mean, the bears are going to die, but then we have to euthanize bears as soon as they get habituated to get in somebody's dog food or get into their bird feeder, or break into their chicken coop. I mean, we had 2 bears killed this last week, young bears that were getting into somebody's chicken coop out where I live. And it's unfortunate that they didn't put a better, security measures with hot wires and whatnot, the electrified wires to keep the bears from getting in there. But that's a conflict. So the bears are going to die. Why not hunt them, manage them? The hunters pay for the conservation, pay for the wildlife management. Let's do that. And let's be a part of this. And people are like, oh, again, it's that disconnect there. People don't understand that we have to be active participants in wildlife and habitat conservation. Otherwise, it's just not going to exist. So these grizzly bears are all over the place. They don't respect mankind anymore because they are the big kahuna in the forest and on the plains. And we have instances now, especially around Yellowstone National Park, where we have people out hiking that are running into mountain bikers, running smack dab into these bears, and they're getting killed. Yep. And it's happened multiple times every year. I mean, half dozen, 10 times a year. Okay, well then you've got a situation where, these bears during hunting season, when the guns go off, that's like ringing the dinner bell. Yep. And they come right in, and we have hunters that are being attacked and killed every year. Matter of fact, we interviewed a guy that happened 10 miles from my house last fall. He was just walking through the woods, and with a buddy of his that was about a couple hundred yards away from him, they were looking for some elk and some deer, and he went through a thick stand of stuff, not really paying attention, and boom, this big boar just smacked him and ripped him. And I mean, he had 5 or 6 surgeries to repair all the damage. Ripped his knees, broke his fibula. I mean, they'd take pieces of bone because he says, we can't do anything for you. But you go to Alaska, where you can hunt grizzly bears and brown bears, and you run across a 1,000-pound brown bear, and it's exit stage left. As soon as they smell you, out. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I say that's self-preservation. And it's reality. Humans are the big kahunas on this planet. We have the greatest impact, negative and positive. So if we have hunting going on in the lower 48 for the grizzly bear, we're talking about an offtake of probably 3 to 5% of the population, and it's all based on science. It's all being run by scientists and wildlife biologists. They won't have a job if there's no more bears, and hunters can't. I mean, the wildlife's best friend, any animal that's hunted, its best friend is the hunter. Because let's face it, we value that animal. I mean, wolves. We had wolf hunting open up about 8-10 years ago. Well, 7-8 years ago in Montana. I'll tell you what. I mean, wolves are dogs. We all know how much your dog in your neighborhood can breed, right? If you just let your bitch run around or whatever. I mean, she can have litters, probably 5-6 litters a year if she wants. It depends on what happens. But the reality is, those dogs are also wolves. Wolves can do the same exact thing. Our cats are lions. How often does your cat can it have, kittens? And we're not talking one kitten. We're talking multiple. Lions, leopards, cheetah, they all can breed multiple times a year. One of the things that it's a little always disconcerting for me is that, people go, oh, well, there's only 50,000, elephants in this country. And if you shoot one, there's only 49. What happens to the other 49,999? And I'm like, hey, folks, this is a renewable resource. Yeah. They reproduce. Okay? So, an elephant takes a little bit longer than most species do. But for the reality is that, most animals, if you have 1,000 of them, the next year, if you just let Mother Nature do its thing and you have nothing to do with it and there's no human impact on it whatsoever, you're going to have about 1,500, 14 to 1,500. On ungulates, so any of your hoofed animals, they usually have about a 35 to 45% survival rate, calf survival rate. So I mean, that's just based on science. And it's like, hey guys, we need now that do you want to give up your city and let the grizzly bears take over? Do you want to give up your farm and your ranch and cut the fences down and no longer impact the soil or anything else because this needs to be set aside for the wildlife? You're not allowed to use it. Do you want to take your subdivision and just abandon it and just bulldoze it all down so that the elk can go hang on there? I mean, hey, that's really the questions we're asking here. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, it's about the habitat. So what's left, we have to prioritize. And that's really what it comes down to. And we have to get everybody on board. Everybody in the cities, everybody in the suburbs, everybody in the country. Because this is our planet. This is our home. And if we don't take care of it, we're going to lose it.
Well, and just to echo again what you said, because I think it's such an important point to get across, is the animals are going to die one way or the other, whether that's from...
Sam, everything dies.
Yeah.
Everything dies. Okay?
Whether that's
we're all going to die.
Starvation and exposure. I mean... I think everybody likes to think these animals die from old age, and I think I've said it before on the podcast. There's this, I think, picture of, okay, when it's time for an elk to die, it walks up the mountain and it lays down in a field of clover, and all the other forest animals gather around it and bellow.
I think you've been listening to me because I have an analogy. It's very similar to that, and it says that when the lion gets old. Now, first of all, lions live in a pride, and so except for juvenile or subadult males, they're usually out on the periphery. So you have one male lion that runs the pride, and the females do 90% of the hunting. So when they kill a wildebeest or they kill a zebra or they kill a Cape buffalo, the lion comes in and does his feeding. When he's done, then the females come in, and when they're done, then the young come in and feed. That's just the way it works. Mm-hmm. And he breeds all those females. So he could be the head of that pride for 5, 6, 7 years maybe. But eventually another younger lion who's bigger and tougher 5 years from now is going to kick his ass. So he's going to leave. Well, he doesn't do the hunting. He becomes a scavenger. Mm-hmm. And he's out there picking and getting what he wants. But when that lion gets to the point where he's going downhill and he's no longer able to defend himself, he doesn't climb up on a hill and have all the other lions come up and sing Kumbaya. He's got to pack hyenas that rip his intestines out while he's alive. Mm-hmm. They'll do whatever they can to kill him and eat him. Like I said earlier, everything outside that window of your house, everything outside that door of your city, even in your cities, something is trying to eat something. And that's just reality. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why we exist here today.
Well, and it's interesting. We kind of touched earlier on the quote unquote trophy hunting. And when you look at it, trophy hunting is a tool of conservation, because what is trophy hunting? It's targeting call it the largest rack on the animal, the biggest animal, and typically that is the oldest. The oldest of the animals, most often.
Sometimes it can be. It depends on genetics.
Yeah, it depends on genetics. There's a lot more to it.
And the environment, and the minerals in the soil, and a lot of things like that.
But there's a lot to be said for that, is in that generally hunters will want to target an older age class of animal, and a lot of that ties into that conservation, because that older age class of animal, it helps improve the genetics, because it brings in new blood when you take out those older animals. And a lot of those animals, they'll be past their breeding age.
Sometimes they can be. So
yeah, and it's not always the case, mm-hmm. but they can often be past their breeding age. They'll still be healthy enough to be fighting off these younger animals. They're trying to breed the females, but they're not passing along their genetics anymore. Mm-hmm. And so hunters also are able to contribute to that by basically removing that old bloodline and allowing new blood to enter this area. And it's you mentioned Fred Bear earlier, and I'm going to make you tell me about that, because you can't drop that line and not give me the story. But it just always. That famous quote, I'm going to butcher it right here. I always do, but we kind of touched on it. It's that quote of, I know that the fate I bestow is much kinder than nature's way of fang and claw and starvation. And it is so true. Nature's brutal.
It's extremely brutal, extremely vicious. And because we try to distance ourselves from killing, even though we are all into blood sports, in so much as that, look at the Roman times, look at football today or hockey. I mean, we like watching the fights, right? We like watching people get smacked into the boards. I mean, and that's just in our DNA. It's the way we're made up. But, in the natural world, things are extremely brutal and vicious. As an ethical hunter, what we strive for is a quick, humane kill. We don't want an animal running around maimed or wounded. We want to shoot it to the point where when it's shot, it doesn't even realize it's been shot and it drops on the ground. And that is, if as an ethical hunter, you have to have expert ability in whatever means of take, whether you're using archery or a firearm. You must practice. You must have the ability to make that shot, to make sure that animal doesn't suffer. And there's reasons for it. One is that, if the animal suffers, then it affects the quality of the meat. They get endorphins and all this, hormones and whatnot that gets fly through its meat, and it does affect the meat. It makes it more gamey, less palatable to us. And it's just, let's face it. Who wants to sit there and listen to, see an animal in misery? We don't like to watch people that, and that kind of brings me to a point that in our Western civilization, again, our educated Western civilization, we don't like the thought of death, especially our own. We like to hold death at arm's length. We don't embrace it in our society. Now, ancient societies always embrace, that we're involved in that natural world, embrace death. Death is ultimate. It's going to happen to every living being on this planet somewhere in its lifespan. So it's real easy to make hunters out as bad people, especially by these groups that are trying to generate money and power, because the rest of the society is kind of like, oh, you're the killer. You want to go out and kill these things. And it's sad that that's the case because, again, there's nothing wrong with that Happy Meal. There's nothing wrong with the cheeseburger. There's nothing wrong with, you paid a corporate farmer, a corporate rancher to mass produce all this stuff and put it all in a great big bin. And then here you go. Here's your burger. You don't know what's in it. You don't know where it came from or anything like that.
Well, I was equated to paying an assassin.
Yeah.
You're literally just paying someone else to do your dirty work. It's like, you don't want to do the deed. So you're hiring a third party assassin to make this kill for you.
100%. You're literally paying someone else to kill an animal for you because you don't want to get your hands dirty. And, and animals, like we said earlier, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for wildlife. Whether it be surviving and the tools and all stuff, but even in modern day age, all these ladies that love the high end perfumes, right? Well, guess what the primary ingredient is, the base ingredient in all the best perfumes in the world? Castor oil from the beaver. And the only way you get that castor oil is to kill a beaver. Now, you might be anti-fur, and you might be wearing perfume, but you're a hypocrite. Anybody who's against, for me, I look at it real simple. I want clean water. I want clean rivers and streams. I'm a trout fisherman. I love to eat fish, fresh out of the stream or fresh out of the lake or fresh out of the ocean. I want to see healthy forests. I mean, I understand a lot about forestry, been around it. I look at trees. I look at their, I can look at a tree. I can see if it's got bug infestations. I can see if it's got disease. I can see if it's healthy or not. But and I own some land, and I'm always constantly looking at my big 300-year-old ponderosa pines and all that stuff. And I've got, I've got owls in my forest. I've got elk and deer and black bear and, mountain lions. And I mean, I love it. But I want those healthy forests. And I want vibrant wildlife populations. I want wildlife to have a healthy place to live so that it can continue to reproduce forever. So if you're against hunting, then you're against me and you're against those three things. Think about it. Because what are you doing? When you make a decision, when you get up in the morning, you flip the switch, the lights come on. Where does your electricity come from? Do you know? Did it come from hydro? Did it come from coal? Did it come from natural gas? Did it come from thermonuclear? Nobody knows. They don't care. The next thing is they walk in the bathroom, flush the toilet, out of sight, out of mind. Where does your shit and piss go? Do you care? No, I just don't want to deal with it because it stinks. But it has an impact. What's the next big decision of the day? Is it a chai latte or caramel macchiato? That we have to change. People have to start thinking about, because, I have young kids, 5 to 15. And I constantly tell them, for every action, there is, and they look at me now and say, reaction. Piss dad off, you're going to get your ass beat. But the reality is this, though. We make decisions every day, whether it's buying decisions in a store, whether it's decisions to drive the vehicles or take airplanes. And all these have an impact. And we have to decide which ones can be mitigated enough to have a least negative impact on our natural world. And if you're supplying and sending money and writing and signing off a petition to stop the importation of African animal parts, trophies from hunters, to come back to the United States because some lion got killed in Zimbabwe that even the Zimbabweans had never heard of, which we could go into that and I could tell all kinds of stories because I know all kinds of things about that lion. But the reality is that you represent the Antichrist of wildlife conservation. You understand me? Mm-hmm. I would love to burn a cross, and not that I'm, saying it's a Christian symbol. My point is I'd love to burn a tattoo on your forehead so everybody knows that you're the Antichrist of our natural world. And that's where it has to go. We have to get to the point because we won't exist on this planet. And it's not, it could not be that far away, because you got to look at the carrying capacity. Because we are animals, different parts, different ecosystems can only handle so many people. And I tell people, well, we got all this technology and all this science. I got news for you. Technology doesn't allow human beings to live on this planet. Yeah, you can extend a lifetime, from transplants and disease drugs and all that kind of crap.
And that's doing just about the opposite of what we
Yeah, you can do this. But the reality is this, though. No technology allows humans to live on the planet Earth. It's nature. It's the soils. Because without the soils, you don't grow your crops to have your Wheaties. Without the soils, you don't have your Bob Evans sausage because you got to feed that pig. You don't have the soils to grow the grasses to have your grass-fed beef to go to Ruth Chris's steakhouse. Okay? And let's face it. Walk in a grocery store. Everything either comes from a plant or an animal, because that's how we are designed to survive. Mm-hmm. So the decisions we make, if we don't support a healthy planet, if we don't support good, sound wildlife and habitat conservation, not preservation. Conservation means the wise use. If we don't utilize it, it won't exist because it'll have no value. And we see this in Africa. We see this in Tajikistan. We see this in Kyrgyzstan. We see this in all these different places where wildlife in these third world countries, high and mighty Western civilization says, we won't allow you to bring some elephant ivory back to our country because they're going to go extinct in your country. Well, no. Botswana today has over 150,000 elephants in its country. You know what the carrying capacity is for that country for those elephants? 40,000. So imagine this, just to put it in layman's terms. How many people live in LA?
I think it's like 4 or 6 million, something like that.
Okay, all right, great. So the little downtown section right there by the LAX where all the skyscrapers are, which is, maybe, 3 or 4 square miles.
Yeah.
Take all of those people that are in the outlying greater LA area and put them right there. Mm-hmm. Okay? Central Park, New York. How many people live in New York? I don't know, 10 million, 12 million? Okay, let's put all of them in Central Park. How well would the research? How will the trees sound? Where are people going to piss and shit? Mm-hmm. It'll be denuded. Everything will die. How are they going to eat? The humans are going to starve to death. There's going to be disease. There's going to be dysentery. There's going to be all kinds of shit going, running through there. It's no different than wildlife. So should we do something about that park or do something about downtown LA if we're going to put all those people in there? Yeah, we got to figure out some way to make it work. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, maybe we don't need to have that many people there. No, I'm not condoning we're going to go shoot people. But my point is with wildlife, we can manage them. We can do this offtake because the thing is wildlife managers take into account not only what the offtake is going to be by hunting, but they're also taking into account what happens in the natural death rate of these animals. What are the predation, as far as what happens, natural disease, just natural death from age. So they have to factor all those in scientifically to come up and make a decision on what's going to happen with those animals.
I was having a quote-unquote conversation with someone, basically an argument on Instagram, and we were talking about that, and he was generally aware of... Oh, gosh.
That's Fred Bear.
That's amazing. For those who can't see, he's showing me a photo with Fred Bear, and oh, my gosh, that is incredible.
Oh, we're going to segue into that now since you want to ask that question. You wanted something?
No, well,
okay, you want to finish this? Let's finish this one.
But okay. I was talking to this guy, and he was generally aware. He had a base awareness of the whole, North American model, and that he does know that money from hunting goes into this. And but we were talking about this, and I'm like, this is regulated. Wildlife biologists literally dedicate their lives to the betterment of all of these species as a whole and the balance of this. And he's like, well, yeah, I get it. I know, they look at the populations and issue tags based on that. He's like, but that only works if there's no issues with weather and disease and poaching. I'm like, you really don't think they understand that those concepts exist outside of, they don't just look at hunting numbers. They look at studies of populations and trends and growth and what the
it's their full-time job. That's what they get paid to do. Yeah, and they have a scientific degree to go with it. Yeah, and some of them are doctorates. So
I mean, it's almost like a willful ignorance. You just want to look at it in the way that supports what you believe. So you don't like hunting. You're aware of this North American model of wildlife conservation, and you're aware that biologists are involved. But I'm going to ignore the fact that they do all of this and they take all of this into account just so I can kind of prove my point over here.
They want to spin it. So, and we see that in politics today. We've seen it with the politicization of wildlife conservation. When I talked about some of the, up in the NDP government in British Columbia a couple of years ago ran a plank on their campaign was that we will ban trophy grizzly bear hunting. Again, there's no such thing as trophy grizzly bear hunting, but they banned all hunting of grizzly bears. And now, we were working with the Tahltan Nation up there filming this last year on this grizzly bear project, and we're talking to 80-year-old elders, and they're like, listen, we're seeing more grizzly bears than we've ever seen before. Now, we lived off the land until the white man showed up, and they started handing us vouchers to go into the store, and we totally screwed them up. But before that, they lived off the land all the way to the 1950s, 60s. And so these 80-year-old elders are like, we managed the bears because they competed with us for our ungulates, for our moose and our caribou. So, but yeah, they're a very spiritual animal. They're very important to us, but yeah, we hunted them because one, we didn't want them coming into our camps and killing our families and destroying our resources, especially when you're living off the land. And then at the same time, it's like, hey, we don't want the competition. We want to make sure that there's more moose calves this next year. But they understand and prioritize them as an iconic animal within that ecosystem, just like hunters do in the lower 48. You talked about this trophy hunting, and we've talked about, that this whole scenario about, the different things that people, the non-hunting public, sees on social media and the mainstream media. And, we talked a little bit earlier about why we hunt, that biocentric approach. But in the last 4 decades, I've watched hunting, I kind of liken it to real estate. 5% of the realtors usually sell 95% of the real estate. They're the pros. Well, 5% of the hunters put out 95% of the messaging because of outdoor television, social media, blogging, all this. We have this huge amount of information that goes out. And what I've seen over the last 4 decades is a transition from promoting and embracing a biocentric approach to hunting, which, let's face it, 95% of hunters hunt to put food on the table. Today, 95%. But that's not what you see. The general public sees grip and grin pictures, guy holding a lion, guy sitting there doing high fives over his elk, guy with a tape measure out measuring this thing. So we've gone from a biocentric approach, and we've morphed into promoting a egocentric approach. And I like to say there's a dirty 3-letter word in conservation today, wildlife conservation. It's ego.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that it's a bad thing in that to achieve and to harvest and kill an animal that you have sought, a specific buck or a specific bull, and or to climb a mountain and get this sheep, whenever there's a huge accomplishment, especially in today's society where people don't, the big deal is to go play golf. That's a big deal. We go and play golf this week. Oh, okay, great. All right. Well, I climbed a mountain and lived off the land for a week, But the reality is it's hunting is falling into this, and I really say it's falling into it because of commerce. When you have a product, how do you differentiate your product from your competitor? Okay, well, if I got a bullet, I got to show, oh, well, you know what? I know a guy that got, a bunch of Boone and Crockett record book whitetails using my gun or using my camo or using my optics or, whatever, my bullet. And so then I can go market that, and other people will go, oh, I want to get some of these animals because now we have these record books, and the record books that were started by Teddy Roosevelt and the Boone and Crockett Club, which is the oldest wildlife conservation club in the world. The reason for it was, go back to Teddy's days, the European tsunami had come through, settlement, progress, and destroyed all the resources and killed all the animals off, almost all of them. Well, now they've all come back, and so what he wanted is to have a scientific datum. So that's why people submitted information in about antler and horn size, so they could have it in, so the scientists could look at this and they could track the trends with these species of animals. Yeah, I get it. But I've sat down with the Boone and Crockett people, CEO, some of their board members, said, hey, in this day and age, if this is truly about science, why does a biologist or scientist need to know who the fucker is that pulled the trigger and the name of his guide? Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm getting? It's propagated this whole industry of one-upping, competition. When we did focus group research last year, we asked them, what is your impression of hunters? Oh, they're all a bunch of egocentric, narcissistic, competitive people. They're not wildlife conservationists. Hunters have lost the mantle of calling them wildlife conservationists, even though we do it. We are it. Anti-hunters call themselves wildlife conservationists, yet they are the Antichrist because they don't do fuck all. They don't have any boots on the ground except for in lobbying, attorneys, in the capitals in different states and Washington, D.C., running media campaigns, running one-page ads in Sports Illustrated and People magazine that cost $600,000, saying, oh, this lion, isn't it terrible that you killed this lion and this is what you did and this is all bullshit. No. What does that do for wildlife? What does it do for lions? Kills a whole lot more lions because these people are ignorant. Like I said, they're the Antichrist. So what has happened in the hunting community, the hunting industry, is now we have this egocentric approach. And when you watch outdoor television today, because of, I've been in the film business for 29 years, and I can tell you that 95% of outdoor television shouldn't be on television. You go to any genre of television programming, murder mysteries, even these ghost shows, how many television shows, individual titles are produced in those genres? Yeah, maybe 8, 10, 12, 15, across the spectrum in North America. Do you know how many outdoor shows were produced 2 years ago? I think last time I did a canvas of the Outdoor Channel, Sportsman Channel, and Pursuit Channel, just 3 cable channels.
Jeez, well, just judging by my old subscription to that MOTV app and the fact that it took me about 5 minutes just to scroll down to through the featured shows, it was well over 250.
Yeah. Over 280 shows.
Jeez.
Hunting, not fishing, hunting shows. So first of all, there's not enough money to pay for all of it.
Yeah.
So these people produce crap that's not, well, when I say it shouldn't be on television, I worked in Hollywood. This shit shouldn't be on television. People are on television because they just happen to be the marketing director of a company and they want to be a hunter, or some guy's got a silver spoon and he loves to hunt and he wants to be on TV to satisfy his ego, or this guy says, hey, we got more money than we know what to do with. I got an oil well. Let's write off all our hunting. So there's no living wage for 95% of these people, yet they put all this crap out there about how great they are as hunters. And it's not all of them. There are some very good shows out there that tell the story of wildlife conservation, where the hosts are good on camera and they're well-spoken, present themselves well and present the issues well. But that's not what the public sees. That's not what mainstream media sees. They keep seeing these grip and grin pictures that we post because it's about, I got another Boone and Crockett this or Boone and Crockett that, or a Safari Club International this or whatever. And because that's what we put out there, and again, how do you differentiate your product from your competitors? They see us competing and trying to one-up each other. And of course, they're always, let's face it, humans have egos. And even in the days 1,000 years ago, not everybody hunted, but hunting was a very integral part of society. You take a village of 100 people, well, first of all, 50 of them were probably women. I just throw that out. So 50 of them weren't really hunting. The other 50 people are the guys. First of all, let's face it, not all of them were very good hunters. Usually about 10% of the population did the hunting for the other 90%. And the other people are good at making moccasins or teepees or bowls or arrowheads or whatever it was they were doing. And for some meat, they would take this and make this for you. It was all barter. There's no money. But that's just the way it is. And if you look at today in North America, especially in the United States, we have a population where we're very blessed that we have the opportunity to hunt. We have a lot of public lands, and we have very good wildlife populations for the most part across the country. So the opportunity to hunt, anybody who wants to hunt can hunt. And because our forefathers were smart enough to say, hey, the wildlife is owned by us, not by the landowner, like it is in most parts of Europe, we have a vested interest in it. So, we have to look at these scenarios and say, okay, so when we have this biocentric approach, now we're into this egocentric approach. Well, what do we do about it? Because the anti-hunters, because of these things called smartphones and the internet, you can live anywhere in the world. And in a nanosecond, you see a picture from a hunter posted on a public social media page. And if you don't understand it because you're disconnected and you don't know where your food comes from, then it's really easy. And you want to keep death at a distance because you're afraid of it. It's really easy to go, oh, hey, the Humane Society of the United States has made these hunters, they're all a bunch of bastards. All they want to do is, kill themselves. And, and we have these phenomenal wildlife NGOs. So Elk Foundation, Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited, the Wild Sheep Foundation. We have all these great wildlife organizations, and they've done incredible jobs for wildlife and habitat conservation. So, but unfortunately, what do they look like to the non-hunting public? They look like a whole bunch of Elmer Fuds raising more rascally rabbits to go out and shoot and kill because they only preach to the choir. So, I looked at it, my wife and I looked at it, and, after this whole Cecil the Lion thing, and we're like, you know what? We got to do something different here. We can't be a part of outdoor television anymore. We can't be a part of this continued status quo because hunting as we know it is going to get banned or regulated out of existence because elections are determined by 50% plus one vote, right? And we live in a representative democracy. I live in a state that has citizen initiative opportunities. Many states have that, which means you just got to get enough people in every county to sign on a petition, and it goes, mass rules, it goes on the ballot. Okay, we've had Montana is the largest per capita number of hunters in any state in the union, and we have had 3 ballot initiatives to ban the trapping on public lands. And they get 40 to 45% of the vote. It's kind of scary. Well, first of all, nobody understands trapping, and we're not going to get into that today. But the problem is they're doing the same thing with hunting. And we're seeing that with the grizzly bear, the trophy grizzly in BC. We're seeing that in the East Coast with the black bear. And they got more black bears than they know what to do with on the East Coast. Because there's more, since the days of the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock, there's more trees than there ever was there prior to that. Because the Indians burned everything. There's more turkeys. There's more deer because there's habitat. And there's more car-deer collisions, and you know what to shake a stick at. People are dying, billions of dollars. The highway insurance, the automotive insurance people are trying to figure out how to, let's hunt them. It's that human-wildlife conflict. So, what we've looked at is the fact, we started an organization last year. It's called the Shepherds of Wildlife Society. And our situation is that we feel as wildlife and adventure filmmakers and photographers, we've brought a coalition of us all together. We want to educate children and decision makers. So lobbyists to politicians to the media. And we want to utilize this incredible material we have, these films and this photography we have, and we want to put those stories in front. The story of wildlife conservation, habitat conservation, in front of these people so they can start to understand what the impacts, what that downstream, what that reaction is to the decisions they make. Because we really firmly believe that if we don't take this pretty radically, my dad always said, the very first environmentalist on this planet was the hunter. And that's exactly what we are. We are environmentalists. Now, we might vote for Republicans, we might vote for Democrats, we may not vote at all, but we love and are passionate about the outdoors, and we care about it. And you can't deny that. And the people that don't interact with the wild places have got to understand that we aren't the majority. We are just a small minority of the population, but we may be the last bulwark to hold back this tsunami of humanity, because what the greatest problem for wildlife today is us. And that's 7.5 billion people. That's going to double. So,
well, then, and hunters, we're so busy half the time too, fighting amongst ourselves because,
Yeah, don't even get me started there. So
one of us. That's a whole other.
It's ego. It's power. It's the same thing. It's nothing about. So, I end my presentations really simple. If you truly think you're a wildlife and habitat conservationist, ask yourself one question at the end of the day, and that one question is: are the decisions I made today in the best interest of wildlife and habitat? Or are they in the best interest of the dollar, the South African rand, if you're dealing with captive bred lions, your business, your organization, or your ego? Again, it's real simple. Are the decisions you made today in the best interest of wildlife and wildlife habitat? Because if you can't say yes, you can't claim to be a wildlife conservationist.
There's so many places I want to go, but this would turn into a 4-hour podcast.
Yeah, I got to do another one anyway. So, but I would say if people want to get more information about what we're doing, just go to shepherdsofwildlife.org, and they can participate in, you can be involved in some of the things we're doing. We've got lots of content there for people to watch and be a part of, and make a donation. Because we're using that money to create educational material. We're targeting teachers through social media with this content, targeting other, folks, like I said earlier, the politicians, targeting the media, and just saying, here, you need to understand this. We see this going on the ground. I just spent 3 weeks in Africa and Zambia working on a project. I'll be going back over to Zimbabwe here at the end of next week for a couple of weeks. I'll be in China next month. I'm seeing these things, and we have a really unique perspective. We're very blessed. But if we don't do something now, we're going to lose it. Mm-hmm. We're going to lose hunting, and we're going to lose the habitat and the wildlife that exists.
So, Shepherds of Wildlife Foundation, I'll make sure to link to that on the show notes page.
Shepherds of Wildlife Society. But it's the shepherdsofwildlife.org.
Society.org.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure to link to that on the show notes page. If people wanted to follow along with you personally, where can they find you?
Well, you can always find me on Instagram, Tom Opre Official, or you can just go to Facebook, and I'm posting every day things we do and the crazy stuff that we experience and stuff. And you can also catch Olivia over there, Olivia Opre, so Nalos Opre. So she's on Instagram and Facebook.
All right. So one thing I always like to end with, I kind of told you this podcast is really geared towards people that are new to hunting, people that maybe that didn't grow up shooting with dad or granddad, coming in from non-traditional hunting backgrounds. And so say you're talking to someone, you're on a trip to New York or whatever, and you're talking to someone, they're like, I've been really thinking about getting into hunting. I hear what you've said about conservation. I'm really interested in this, but I don't know anyone. I don't have the resources. I don't have the background. There's so much to learn. I don't know if this is for me. I'm interested, but I'm a little intimidated maybe. What advice or words of wisdom would you give that person?
I mean, the first thing is just get outdoors. Get out into the great outdoors. As much as going on a hike for the day, go up and get off the trail. That's the key thing. Don't go to a big national park. Go to a national forest, go to a state forest. Or if you know somebody who owns a ranch or a big piece of ground, or if there's something with a power company or something like that that's available where they allow public access. And if you go to private land, make sure you get permission, and then go out and explore. Look for things. Understand it. Research it. I mean, this day and age with information, you want to learn how to go fishing, hunting, camping, backpacking, kayaking, what any of these things you want to do. You can Google it. And if you're a millennial, you can watch it on YouTube. Somebody's got a video. I got tons of videos out there to see what's going on. But the reality is that, go back to the shepherdsofwildlife.org. We have a section in there about ethical hunter, modern ethical hunter, our principles, and look at those things and see what they are, and then research what it is to do those things, and look at organizations. First of all, what is your ultimately you want to do? Do you want to put food on the table, or do you just want to be an active participant in wildlife conservation? Your fish and game departments at every single state has people there that our taxpayer dollars pay for to let you know and help you and guide you. There are sportsmen's groups, not necessarily shooting, but sportsmen's clubs all over the United States. You can Google one, and I'm sure there's one probably in your county. And just go to their meetings and start talking to people, and you'll be surprised. Hey, yeah, you want to go fishing, you want to go hunting, this is the time you go. Here's the licenses. Here's what you need to do. If you go down to of course, any of the sporting goods stores will outfit you if you can afford to buy some stuff, but you don't need to buy that expensive stuff. You can go online and you can buy used guns. You can buy classified bows and arrows. Then you want to have an archery tackle shop to teach you, what to do with modern archery tackle, because it's not like picking up a bow and chucking a spear. It's very technical, technologically advanced. But again, go to our website, look at those principles of modern ethical hunter, and then start to research what it is you're interested in. But go explore. Go see what's on the other side of the mountain. Go see what's over on the other side of the valley. Go look at those places. Identify, get an identification book on all the flora and fauna, all the plants. Understand what the different plants are. Identify them. Look into herbs and medicines. Look into what wildlife conservation has done in those areas that you're interested, or whether you're interested in just putting food on the table. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is hunts, the founder of Facebook. I mean, I've got a video. I want
to say a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he's out there. He's got an egg going, and he's cooking a wild boar that he shot up, I think, at the Hone Ranch, north of LA.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want to give my kids, a clean protein source, GMO, steroid-free protein. What a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we should all do it. And and you go to certain countries like the northern European countries like Sweden. They hunt 80, 90,000 moose a year they kill, and you can actually take your moose and sell it to the grocery store. You keep some of it, but a moose is a big animal.
Yeah.
But they don't have the laws like we have in the United States on USDA this and this regulation and this red thing. No. Hey. And what I tell hunters, one of my principles on modern ethical hunter is that you must every year give game meat to a non-hunter. Not a hunter wasn't successful, to someone who's never had game meat before. Bring them some ground hamburger from your deer or your bison or your elk, or some duck breasts, or bring them some fish or whatever that is from harvesting nature. Because nature there is a bounty there for us to harvest. But because our population's high, human population, we have to be careful how much. So we can only take so much so that it continues to reproduce and populate that carrying, that ecosystem, those woods, those forests, those fields, and that's a healthy thing on our planet, because that's the way the planet's always been. So real simple. Just do a little research, but go out in the outdoors. Go explore. Walk down the beach, but get the heck out of LA. Go up. Go up in the mountains, and, in the Sierras.
I mean, even in Los Angeles, not an hour drive away, you can be off the trail, walking through rivers, walking through trees. It is so accessible if you look for it.
And hunting is a challenge. Okay. To learn how to hunt, to learn how to be one with the woods, to understand the patterns of life in the wild, to understand why the deer is there, or why the quail's there, or why the elk's there, or why the wild boar's there. They live because they have places where they eat, places where they rest and sleep, and they have places that they travel to and fro. And then they have places they go to reproduce, to mate. Okay. We go to the bar, right? Go find a gal or go to the grocery store, get some food. Well, we do the same exact thing, right? But we don't ever think about that way because, unfortunately, humans kind of have a high and mighty impression of themselves, self-impression of themselves. And but we do have a serious adverse effect on our wild places, and we just have to take responsibility for them. And that's what we have to do. Otherwise, it'll be gone.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time. This is one of my absolute favorite podcasts I've ever sat down to record.
No, it's been a great pleasure.
And I look forward to talking again sometime in the future.
Well, 2 years, POMA's going to be in Kalispell, up my backyard, so you can come to Montana.
There we go.
And then we can do a podcast about whatever's going on in Montana then.
I'll tell you what.
And go fly fishing.
I never need an excuse to come to Montana. That's home. Let's just say that's where my heart knows home is already. So it's just taken my body a little while to get there. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Again, like you said, if anybody's interested in what we're doing, go to the shepherdsofwildlife.org. Contribute, shoot us, get us on our newsletter, and we really appreciate the support.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for episode 117 of The Wild Initiative. I hope y'all really enjoyed that one. I had an incredible time talking with Tom. Y'all, I could not have asked for a better guest to join me for the very first episode of The Wild Initiative. Y'all make sure you head on over to the show notes page at thewildinitiative.com/117. Check out all of Tom's info along with the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, as well as getting links to everything we talked about in today's episode. Also, y'all make sure you head on over to Sawyer.com. Check out all the incredible products that Sawyer offers to help keep you and your family safe in the outdoors this season. Well, I'm looking forward to talking to y'all again next week, but in the meantime, I hope this episode inspired you to get outdoors, get involved, and make your initiative for the wild.
Thank you for listening to The Wild Initiative. Please take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, and head on over to thewildinitiative.com to get show notes, check out the blog, gear discounts, other podcasts from the Wild Initiative family, and more.